Finalizing the piece. I'm now getting to the space where I'm getting closer to the end of this piece, and now I'm looking to create those last touches that I talked about in the beginning, that are mostly like nice to haves. And the first thing that I want to do is adding life to the scene. I needed something cute in the scene to kind of offset the otherwise a bit serious tone of the piece. I mean, it wasn't like super serious, but it's like a building and vegetation. That's kind of it. So I ended up creating this elephant pot. Um, there wasn't really that much thought to this, other that I wanted something unique and cute and fun to the scene. And I remember growing up that we had like these wooden elephant figurines that were quite popular. I mean, they're mostly like a tourist gimmick, and I think that's why I got them as a kid. But anyway, so I thought, why not make my own version of this? But also because I'm gonna have like pots and vegetation and stuff like that in the scene, why not make it into a pot? After that, a friend of mine asked if I could add some life to the scene in form of like a living animal, like a monkey jumping around or something like that. I felt like that could maybe be a bit too difficult. Uh, but then I thought, why not have like a dog rummaging through trash or something like that? And this was just so much more difficult than I anticipated. So first of all, like I don't sculpt that often, and I I've done some rigging and animation in Maya, but I just feel like it doesn't translate to Blender. Like it just confuses me. But anyway, so I bought Polygon's tutorial of creating stylized animals, uh, and I created this quick concept of a dog. And I went through the entire process, and I was pretty okay with the result. But it just bothered me that I had created this very like Disney-like dog for my piece. And even though my project has this kind of mix between stylized and realism, and I do have some stylized assets like the chicken and the elephant pod, I just felt like the Disney dog didn't fit, and I don't know why it just didn't work. Also, I couldn't figure out like rigging and animation in Blender. I even had like an already made rig, but animation in Blender just for some reason confuses me. And I was just doing some key animation and it was not getting exported, and animations were like completely resetted, and it was just very confusing. And I'll be honest, it's the thing that really frustrates me the most because I love creating small creatures and giving them some life. Like when I was creating the world for Collie and the Reaper Man, I had these crows idling and eyes hiding in the dark, and it was just fun to create these beings, living beings in my world. It kind of does feed into the fact that I want to create the pets and fitness vibe, and I think one thing that really exemplifies pets and fitness aesthetics is that there are always some kind of creature in the corners having their own life. But yeah, so now I feel like my a lot of my environments are becoming like very stale without it. But I think I just have to. I come to the realization that I just need to sit down and understand rigging and animation in Blender separately from a project. Just so now I'm getting to like the other stuff in the scene. So here I'm creating the air conditioner. At one point, I'm not really happy with that grid, so I kind of like changed my mind of how I would go away to do it. So I just made like I'm using the wireframe modifier quite a lot, and then just like a soft selection and like a slight rotation, and I thought that kind of worked for what I wanted to create. And after that, I'm going into Substance Designer just to get some like rust details or just something to make it a little more interesting. Um, Adding some normal maps, depths, like the usual stuff. Just trying it out in Unreal with a little movement. This is sped up, so don't worry about that. And I also tried to do something with geometry nodes just to get some random cabling. One thing I didn't expect to find that fun to do was actually the fencing. I was wondering if I would do them in geometry or if I would use a texture. Eventually, because there was just a lot of details in the fence, I opted to do an architecture. And for that, I made a separate file where I would just go off and make random patterns and shapes and connect them somehow. Um, it was just so relaxing to make these and kind of reminded me of being bored back in school and you're just doodling these big patterns in your notebook instead of actually learning anything useful. Uh, but anyway, I was actually quite surprised as well, like how well these turned out in terms of the architecture and how well it fit into the scene. Like here, you can see some examples of me using the fence atlas, I don't know, texture inside the windows and just outside the house. And I don't know, I'm very happy how they turn out. I'm just showing a bit of the process of some of the trees that I made for the scene. There's nothing really that different from how I've been doing trees before, but I would say one thing that I did just wanted to try out in this um, workaround was that uh, there's like a new feature in SpeedTree that's about being able to add vines or vegetation on one side of the tree to, like overgrowth and stuff like that. So that's something that I tried out this time around. And it was kind of interesting because I was able to use the same vine texture, the bunched up and everything, like the bunched up leaves that I use for the vines for the house, and I was able to reuse that one in, for example, the palm tree as well. And it also reminds me, I actually did try to remake the palm leaf thing, mostly because I felt like it was just becoming too realistic, had too much spacing in between everything. Uh, but it just bothered me. Like I was able to get this kind of cool leaf in Substance Painter, but I just couldn't get it baked down into a plane. As in like loading a high-res mesh with a base color. I remember clearly being able to do that in Substance Painter before, but for some reason I couldn't do it this time around. I tried to bake it in Blender as well, but it was just baking all this other information as well, apart from, even though I just wanted like the base color. And eventually I think I just had to give up. Actually, that was a brain fart moment. I actually was able to make it into the engine. But don't ask me how, because I really can't remember how the fuck I got it to work. I'm just gonna quickly go through some of my substance workflows here as well. So, in the beginning of the concept, I did kind of sketch up what kind of materials I wanted. So, first of all, here we just have like the very generic kind of tiling brick material that's supposed to be a bit more stylized and everything. Uh, but then it also evolves into the, let's see, the trim sheet material for the bricks. So I first make tiling brick material and use that as a base to create the trim sheet with the brick sheet materials that you can see here that has some kind of special symbols on it and everything. Um, then I go on to make some of the simpler ones. Like for example, here is just the tin material that I use for some of the roofing. Um, and I think one of the more, at least complex for me in a way, was the one of the ground materials that had circular patterns, but it was also interwoven with different kind of vertical trim sheet things. Uh, but it was kind of fun. I think I'm not skilled enough for this to actually look as good as it could look, but I was fine with the result. I also ended up doing this geometry nodes for my bricks on the sidewalk. I opted to do this instead of just an array because the array is kind of like limited in the way that you have the same model and uh, it's difficult to get like the random rotation and stuff like that. From what I know, maybe you can do it. Uh, but yeah, it just gave me an excuse to try the geometry nodes. I'm just also making an excuse to put some clothes on the clothing lines and everything. I thought this was going to be a lot easier than it was. I just assumed that I was going to be able to put on the cloth dynamics Blender and be done with it. Turns out it didn't really work out that well. But I was reaching the limit of this project and I just needed to get something done. The very last part is just adding some extra VFX like fireflies, not fireflies, they're just regular flies, and butterflies as well. Um, I was kind of happy with the butterfly and I was trying to rig it and animate it again. It failed. So I was trying this other method of using VFX to animate the butterfly, which is probably more optimized, but it didn't look as good, unfortunately, in the very end. Finally, I'm trying to get to the part where I'm framing the scene. So after getting some feedback from my friends like the VFX and animals, I was also told that I just need to fix the composition for the scene. So first of all, I'm just trying different lightings and as well as getting things in the foreground to really sell the scene here. Um, but it's again, I feel like I keep doing this mistake quite a lot where I don't settle on the composition very early in the project. So it just ends up that I get like different perspectives like every time I try to take a picture of the scene. And I think it's just something that I need to learn for next project to just really decide on the composition quite early.